As no excuse, in-person early voting starts today. We're looking at some of the measures Missourians are voting on.
WGEM's Missouri Capitol Bureau reporter Hannah Falcon breaks down what's in a question about reducing taxes for child care providers.
As Missourians begin casting their votes for the August primary, I spoke with one preschool on how a ballot measure could affect Missouri families.
Paul Prevost runs Tiger Tots Preschool in Columbia.
1, 2, 3, go.
He knows how vital child care is to Missouri families.
Almost 50% of our families receive some sort of a form of state subsidy.
But also how difficult it is to keep the doors open at a daycare.
We see a large number of smaller centers in particular starting to close their doors due to lack of staffing.
But Missourians can now cast their votes on Constitutional Amendment 1, which asks whether child care facilities like Tiger Tots should be exempt from paying property tax.
So every penny helps.
The Missouri Chamber of Commerce supports the amendment. It says a lack of child care is preventing many Missourians from joining the workforce. Although the amendment is a start, Prevost recognizes that it does not go as far as needed to reduce child care costs.
It's certainly not the most the state can do to help. The number one thing the state could do right now is change the way that they approve people when it comes to child care subsidies.
The governor and some lawmakers attempted to pass new laws this year to give more state assistance for child care to low-income families, but it did not make it through the Missouri Senate. Reporting in Columbia, I'm Hannah Falcon, WGEM News.